I worry a lot here on Breaking Points about polarization, red versus blue. It's the easiest form to discuss, but in reality, the way that polarization really affects our lives is all the little ways that we start to hate each other, from dating preferences to where you will live, to the type of car that you will buy, to which school that you will send your kids to. Polarization actually divides us in a more fundamental way than we often tend to realize. And I often said that polarization today is best understood by a single question. Did you attend a 4-year college degree or not? The answer to that question is probably the single best determinant of how you voted in 2020. If you did statistically, you're much more likely to vote Democrat, and if you didn't, statistically more likely to support Trump. Where there are important exceptions, and overall it's as good as we got, but increasingly another factor is actually beginning to emerge that could really hurt us. What gender are you? As you could actually see from those maps, if only women voted Democrats would win by a huge margin. If only men voted, the same would happen for Republicans. So once again, there are important exceptions to this rule, but the more true that it becomes, the bigger problems you are going to have. In fact, the more that I'm looking at emerging data, I'm realizing we've never actually been less racially polarized as a country, which is not a bad thing, but within races, we are actually polarizing amongst very different lines. Take Latino voters, for example. The two big predictors of whether a Latino voted for Trump in 2020 are, did you attend college or not, and are you a man or a woman? The same is true for white voters. Increasingly, we see signs of this trend even amongst black voters. Andrew Breitbart once famously said, "Politics is downstream of culture." In this divide, I think it's becoming even more clear. What stunned me was not just that this is true for adults, but it appears true even for the emerging generation of teenagers, who much has been talked and written about as the great liberal hope. If you're talking about just women, that might be true. But some new data unearthed by Daniel DeVise at The Hill, buried within the Monitoring the Future survey from the University of Michigan, finds that the political identities of 12th grade boys differs starkly from the political identities of 12th grade girls. The Michigan survey finds, quote, 12th grade boys are nearly twice as likely to identify as conservative versus liberal. Now, it's important that many people don't identify as anything. Important to note that. Conservative standing still only is approximately 1/4. Liberal is at 13%. But it's important designator whenever you put it up against women. For girls, it could actually be more different. As the survey finds, quote, the share of 12th grade girls who identify as liberal rose from 19% in 2012 to 30% in 2022. Only 12% of girls identified as conservative in last year's survey. So effectively, the polar opposite of what's going on with boys. What's interesting is not the divide, but how actually new the divide is. As they note, quote, as recently as late 2000s, liberal boys occasionally outnumbered conservatives, and back in the Carter era, both boys and girls were leaning towards liberal. As researcher Gene Twenge actually found in a new book published Generations, the difference in attitudes between 12th graders has never been bigger than today. What's really interesting is that over a 5-year period, girls became slightly more liberal, but it's boys in particular who became much more conservative. So this explains actually a lot about today. A lot of trends like Liver King and Andrew Tate phenomenons online, shitposting, Reddit culture as the overall culture becomes dramatically more hostile to traditional masculinity, especially during the Trump years. The new data on high schoolers in particular will have profound consequences for our society, culture, and our demographics as the years progress. We're already seeing what happens when this is applied to college, for example. The more college is coded as left-wing, and for women and gays, the more that boys are just going to drop out. That's something that I've covered here repeatedly. Boys who are fleeing college by the millions and as higher education soon will have a gender gap nearly equal to the electoral gap that we are seeing right now. It is really as if worlds are colliding, and to once again answer that question, why should you even care about gender gaps in politics or in education? Because it profoundly influences who dates who, and thus who is going to reproduce, or even if that's attainable. A college graduate, for example, on average, 43% less likely to date someone who is, quote, a Republican than the average American. It jumps up to 65% for the term, quote, is a Trump supporter. Dating and political polarization amongst gender lines creates a dramatic mismatch in the availability of mates, both genders, as they age up to the point where they desire a permanent partner. And while I support people's right to be single, of course, if they want to, the data tells us that people who are single longer and throughout their lives are less happy, less likely to report satisfaction in life, more likely to suffer from health problems, suffer worse overall lifetime earnings, and suffer on a myriad of other key quality of life metrics. So what can we do about this? I honestly don't know. Richard Reeves has some great ideas in his book about how to stop gender imbalances in schools and higher education, but I think it goes way deeper than that. Culture is telling men that they're not wanted, and they're responding accordingly by becoming both less desirable as mates and becoming more self-loathing and angry with the internet as a vehicle. Andrew Tate was a symptom of this disease. Liver King and many other scam artists to come and go since. Step one, at least, is acknowledging that we have a problem. It's okay to be a man, and it's also okay to care about men. So I'm curious what you thought, Crystal, about that.
Hey guys, obviously I had a lot of thoughts on what Saagar had to say there. So if you want to see my thoughts on this monologue and every other Saagar monologue, make sure you subscribe at breakingpoints.com.